All right, it is Asian American Pacific Islander Month, and we want to test your knowledge right here on Newsy Live. Let's see if you know the answer to this next question. What do Vice President Kamala Harris, fashion designer Vera Wang, and NFL Hall of Famer Troy Polamalu all have in common? Can you guess? All right, if you know the answer, awesome, great. If you don't, well, that puts you in line with more than half of Americans who say that they can't name a single famous Asian American public figure. 58% actually. It's all according to a recent survey of more than 5,000 U.S. residents, and that is up more than 10 points from last year when it comes to Asian American history. The numbers just as bad. 42% of Americans surveyed were unable to name an Asian American historical event more recent than the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. With us now to offer some insight into this survey is author and journalist Shalene Gupta. Shalene, good to see you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Veronica. It's great to be here.
So, Shalene, let's break this down. I mean, what are your thoughts when you look at these numbers? Are you surprised by them at all?
I'm not, actually. The study portrays a really clear picture that in America, we just don't have a great knowledge and understanding of Asian Americans, their history, and their issue. There just isn't representation in our education and in the media when we talk about this.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is not something that is taught in schools, right? But this lack of awareness, unfortunately, is impacting Asian Americans living in the United States. So what have you seen as a direct result of this? How have communities been impacted?
Unfortunately, the lack of education and awareness means that it's a lot easier to other Asian Americans. So with the rise of COVID, what we saw is an increase in racism against Asian Americans. So 1 in 5 Americans think that Asian Americans are responsible for COVID, and a third of Americans actually think that Asian Americans have more loyalty to their perceived country of origin rather than America, and this number has actually increased since COVID.
Let's talk about COVID and how that has led to this spike in violence against Asian Americans. What more can you tell us on that front, and what do the numbers and statistics show you there? What more can be done here?
It's not a pretty picture in terms of increased racism. 56% of Americans are saying that they believe that there is racism against Asian Americans, and we're seeing that to be true. On the positive side, 70% of Americans actually say that they do believe racism against Asian Americans is a problem and something needs to be done.
So it definitely seems, though, that you look at these numbers overall. We talk about how 58% of Americans couldn't even name one person, one AAPI prominent figure, right? So it seems as though there is this lack of representation of AAPIs in the media, in Hollywood. What about in other areas? What about in business or in politics, for example?
Again, the numbers are not great. There is actually a reason why people are struggling, and it's because Asian American representation at the very top is not very high. Less than 1% of U.S. elected officials are Asian American, and in corporate America, less than 6% of senior roles go to Asian Americans.
I just want to back up for a second, because you said that less than 1% of all U.S. elected officials are Asian American. Less than 1%?
1%.
I mean, that number is just, it's mind-boggling, right? Because if you think about the number of Asian Americans that live in the United States. I mean, I was a news anchor in San Francisco, and that was a city that had a 35% AAPI population. So it seems to me like there is such a huge disparity in these numbers. What steps do you think can be taken to try and fix these issues? What is the solution here overall?
I'm going to call it a 3-step process. First, education, which we need these issues. We need the history in our textbooks. We need people to be aware of the issues that Asian Americans are facing, because if you're not aware, then you can't do anything. And that starts with education. Second, we do need more representation, and that means promoting Asian Americans, voting for them, having them in TVs, reading their books, consuming their content. And finally, awareness. It's AAPI month. Let's push these stories. Let's talk about Asian American representation and issues, because the positive note is America does want to change. 70% of Americans believe this is an issue, and 39% believe that education would fix these issues. So let's do it together.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think that we could do it together. And I wanted to go ahead and just circle back to Asian Americans in the workplace, for example. I do think that there is an issue with Asian Americans being the quote-unquote model minority in the U.S. And having this stereotype, if you will, in which they are hardworking and dependable, yet they're not getting promoted. Why is that?
It's really tragic. And it goes back to this idea of racism and othering. And when we simply think about a leader and what they look like, we have the stereotype that Asian Americans are hardworking. They go for the entry-level jobs. They don't speak up. They don't advocate for themselves. And they're just not the type of person that people see as leaders. And because there's a lack of representation of them already, people aren't picturing a leader when they look at an Asian American and they're thinking about, who am I ready to promote? Who do I want to lead me?
But historically speaking, Shalene, I mean, let's go ahead and break this down. What is behind this? I mean, why aren't Asian Americans speaking up? Why don't they have a louder voice, if you will, as a community?
It's a really good question, Veronica. So historically and culturally, in several different Asian countries, there is this emphasis on the idea that you have to keep face, you have to swallow your bitterness, that if you just keep your head down, you work harder, you try more, and you're better than anyone else, you will get promoted. But that simply doesn't really work in America. And I've been doing a lot of interviews with Asian Americans who have talked about how what their parents taught them about keeping their heads down, not speaking up, and waiting for rewards to come simply isn't working, and they have to teach themselves to advocate.
So is it time for change in the Asian American community?
Absolutely, both internally in the community and externally. Change is going to come when all of us work on it.
Author and journalist Shalene Gupta, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and your awareness around the issue. I so appreciate it. Hats off to you. Thank you, Shalene.
Thank you.
So look,